Reading from 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. As you come to Christ, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. This is the word of the Lord. Hi friends, it's been an interesting last hour or so for me as I've been reading up on Leviticus 21, which is some rules and regulations for the priests and how the priests are to serve. And I've had two jobs. Well, I've had lots of jobs in my life, but only two kinds of jobs. One is being a carpenter, the other is being a pastor. And one of the things I've loved about that is I've never had a job that's required me to shave more than once a week, sometimes twice a week. But I would not qualify as high priest. Look, Leviticus 21, verse 10 says, he must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes. I teared a few clothes as a carpenter, and I often had unkempt hair. But I'm really glad that I'm not a high priest and that I'm allowed to shave once a week and sometimes have a bit of stubble happening. But it's been an interesting passage in seriousness as I've looked at it, because of these regulations that are put on priests in verse 1 to 9 and then on the high priest from verse 10. I'm about to read them to you. And one of the things that has really struck me is I've read a couple of Christian authors who say these regulations are really significant for those in Christian ministry today, which I've found to be quite a surprising thing to say, because these regulations are for the Old Testament priesthood. And the Old Testament priesthood had that whole system of clean and unclean and holy that we looked at a bit. There are certain things, if you touch a dead body or you eat certain kinds of animals, they are unclean. They defile you. And there are certain things you can do to make yourself clean. And there are certain things that can make you holy. And if you are holy, you can be made unholy, all that sort of stuff. That system, we don't quite think about life in the way that the Israelites do. And I don't believe the New Testament does ask us to, although we are asked to be holy. So there's a challenge in this passage. Yes, we are a holy priesthood, as I've just read from 1 Peter, but what does that look like? Let me read it to you. Let's think about it together. Leviticus 21 from verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die, except for a close relative such as his mother or father, his son or daughter, his brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent on him, since she has no husband. For her he may make himself unclean. He must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself. Remember, you were defiled, you were made unclean by touching or being in the presence of a dead body. There's a rule here that the Old Testament priesthood were not to do that. And in fact, the high priest wasn't allowed to make himself unclean for anyone. There weren't even exemptions for his own family, but the priest, there's still pretty strict exemptions. They are not to touch dead bodies unless there are extremely close family members on view. Then it goes on, verse 5, priests must not shave their heads or shave off the edges of their beards or cut their bodies. I always shave off the edge of my beard when I shave, and so I certainly don't qualify as an Old Testament priest. I'm not exactly sure why there was this regulation. Maybe that shaving was actually an expression of pagan worship. That would be my suggestion, my guess. Verse 6, they must be holy to God and must not profane the name of their God. Why? Because they present the food offerings to the Lord, the food of their God. They are to be holy. The priests were the ones who would, as the people came to make their sacrifices, the priests would bring them and offer them to the Lord. It was a really important work of a mediator between the people and the holy God. And so the priests had to keep themselves clean and holy, and there were only very slight exemptions that they could take for that. Verse 7 is interesting. They must not marry women defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are holy to their God. That is, they must not marry women who are morally suspect. And the word for divorced there actually means a woman who is sent away from her husband in the sense that she's disgraced herself and he's divorced her because she's been sexually unfaithful. That's the particular meaning here. If there's any suspicion about the moral character of his wife sexually, he cannot marry that woman. And so your marriage as a priest affects your ability to offer up holy food to God. And then verse 9, if a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father, she must be burned in the fire. Now, I've been interested this morning reading a number of Christian authors saying this passage is really important for Christian leaders today. And one of my thoughts is, if a Christian leader today was to have a daughter who became a prostitute and he tried to burn her in the fire, try getting away with that in the Australian or the American law court. Now, I just want to say, a daughter doing that would be devastating, and it's a really seriously unholy thing to do. But it's very clear that these rules are not cut and paste, apply to the Old Testament priest in the same way they apply to a New Testament ministry leader. There's a stark difference. New Testament Christian leaders do not offer food sacrifices to God. That's not part of our worship anymore. So there's a very significant difference. And yet at the same time, there is a call for the Old Testament priests to be holy. And in the New Testament, in 1 Peter, Christians are described as a holy priesthood, bringing spiritual offerings to God. In Romans 12, Paul says that we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to God. In Hebrews 13, we're told to always offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. We do sacrifice ourselves, praise, and we give spiritual offerings to the Lord. And that's true of every Christian. What I want to ask you is, what do we do with this? Because we are a holy priesthood, we must take holiness seriously. But my question for you is, in what ways does Leviticus 21, verse 1 to 9, help us to think about what holiness looks like, not for Christian leaders, but for all Christians, because we're all a holy priesthood? Should this regulate our facial hair? Should this regulate our relationship? Should Christians not go to funerals unless they're of close relatives? Or does this passage say nothing to us? Does it say, do we apply it word for word, or is it somewhere in the middle? What do you think? Looking forward to hearing from you. God bless, and may you be holy as your God is holy by the power of his Spirit. Bye for now.